Hello and welcome back to another Picard review where, of the past few episodes, as I've been very negative on this series, thinking about it, this one actually has the most potential in a while to be good. Because it's got to do some plot stuff, like with the Watcher, all that. It's got to do some of its own plot stuff. Not like any other bit of Star Trek referencey thing. It not filling time. I think this, and even Discovery season 4 to a lesser extent, is suffering from the fact that this doesn't have to be a season-long arc. You could have had 2 arcs in the season, and I think it would have been much better. I'm looking at the thumbnail, which I think is behind me. Brent Spiner's gonna be in this one. I think Q's gonna be in this one as well. It's got potential. A few things I wanted to address in the intro before we got started, of course. First off, is someone commented in my last video that Whoopi Goldberg, so Guinan, was recast because Whoopi Goldberg was busy doing some sort of like Holocaust event in Iran. I can't verify. I tried really hard. Like, she might have been. It's really hard when any phrase, including Whoopi Goldberg in Holocaust, put into Google, is gonna come up with results about her suspension. But the point is, whether that's true or not, isn't particularly important, at least in this context. I suppose it kind of is important for other reasons. It's not Whoopi Goldberg's fault. It's not any actor's fault that their character gets recast, ever. I suppose if an actor also happened to be in charge of casting, then maybe it is their fault. But, like, even if the actor is approached and they say no, it's not their fault if their character gets recast. They don't have some sort of obligation to always be that character. It's the fault of producer, writer, company, like someone on the big chain who went, you know what, we're not going to make a new character that we can fully explore and would be interesting. We're going to get someone else to play this classic character, and it's just not going to be as good and not feel like the classic character and just muddy things a bit. Thank God Deep Space Nine chose to make Kira and not just recast a Laren, which is probably one of the best examples of why you should just make your own character. I talked a lot about this last review, but the main thing was just, I want to make it clear, don't blame Whoopi Goldberg. Like, don't necessarily blame any of the producers. Don't blame Alex Kurtzman. I don't think it was him. Like, we don't know where in the chain. I found a lot of reviews, like the director and stuff, talking about the new Guinan. No reference to why she was recast whatsoever. I hope we can get something one day, but if that thing about the Holocaust was true, I can't verify it. Secondly, I think some people who are honestly more into the show than me have figured out what the divergence in time is. There's been a lot of references to a mission upcoming from the reference of where they are now, of a mission to Europa, some random space mission. In the first episode, Picard really randomly mentioned his, like, great cousin, Rene Picard, because everything has to be a reference now, I guess. And, like, it was a really kind of awkward line, like a lot in the first episode, who was instrumental in early space exploration. And then Q's newspaper, it really wanted us to focus on the article about the mission to Europa. And Q was in the Europa outfit, of course. I don't know if it's a real Europa outfit, but sorry, not Europa, ESA, which, if you don't know, is the European Space Agency. And there's been a few other references, if I recall correctly, generally to that. And so the theory I read was that this actually succeeds, and Earth kind of starts doing space stuff before it's ready. Which, if it's true, would be just about the worst possible plot for a Star Trek in existence. Hey, let's not do space exploration. It could also go the other way, where maybe this mission doesn't succeed, and kind of Gary 7 style, they have to fix it. But, like, some mission to Europa is the defining moment for humanity that decides if we go totalitarian or utopian. Think about what Apollo 11 did for humanity, which is basically nothing but some fancy technology, like Velcro is what I say, not like weaponry, but like Velcro. And yeah, really, that would be the most underwhelming this is what went wrong in history, it's especially just before stuff like World War III, the Bell Riots, and actual major events. But only time will tell, I suppose. I'm also realizing that John Delancey said Q was in 6 episodes this season. I'm pretty sure, counting this one, he's gonna have been in 5. And isn't it great that I subtitle the Q episodes with a Q in them so I can easily check that? He's actually been in all of them. Meaning that after this episode, if John Delancey is right, he only has like 1 more appearance? I guess maybe you might not count the Stargazer if that was 1 day of filming for episode 2 and they just reused the scene. But, I don't know, that's gonna be interesting. Anyway, God, 9.5 minutes. I'm rambling with this intro. Let's just get in to the video and let's hope it's good, because I really don't want to have to organize a live stream. See, that one was pretty good, actually. Once they're actually telling a story and not doing filler or anything, you know, they can manage to get it pretty good. That being said, I do have to get my main complaint out of the way first, and then we'll get into the positives, because otherwise I'm just going to be thinking about it. Oh, hang on. College dorm, thin walls, neighbors, Why the fuck is the Borg Queen still on? And unattended, hooked up to the ship. They established that you could turn the Borg Queen off for basically no reason. It didn't do anything in that episode, and every other time since, it's ruined the story. Genuinely. Like, it's not even an ethics thing, because the ethical decision is to turn the Borg Queen off. This isn't euthanasia. This is just putting her to sleep for a bit. She is spent her whole life with the entire collective in her head, and she's sitting in a room, a dark room without stimulus, in silence and alone. That is torture. It's been torture for every Borg drone we've ever seen, and it is unethical to leave the Borg Queen in this situation. The ethical decision is to put her to sleep, and there is no reason to leave her on, and every reason to turn her off. On top of that, the Borg safety, like, Girardi, why the fuck are you nose to nose with the Borg Queen? You know how they assimilate people. Why are you not on the other end of the ship entirely? Like, I know it's a stressful situation, but if I was in, like, if there was a shooter or something, you know what I wouldn't do? I wouldn't put myself in range of the gun. Like, I would not be thinking straight, but the one thing I would know is don't be in range of the gun. Don't be in range of the Borg Queen. Fuck me. Okay, that's over. And now that we've established if you do this one easy thing, there's basically no conflict whatsoever in the story, yeah. See, they actually had, like, proper development for the first time since, well, episode 2, the only other good episode. There was something I wanted to address before about the last episode I forgot as well. They actually did in this episode that the, supervisor was the same title Gary 7 used. This one is way more advanced than Gary 7. Stupidly far beyond advanced. There are reasons you could do it. Maybe Gary 7 wasn't as high a tier. Maybe, I was gonna say it is just the 60 years of technological development, but it'd probably be about 40 if you consider that she would have probably been around since the start of Rene's life. That was a detail I was never going to catch up on. But basically the same organization as Gary 7, which of course Picard knows about and doesn't think to mention Time Zero. Our second thing is that the director's official, not directors, it might have been producer, some head, their official stance on why they didn't reference Time Zero is the explanation that it never happened because the Federation never existed. Which doesn't work. You can look at my comment in the last video to explain why it doesn't work in any way, and even if it did work, it doesn't explain why Picard didn't attempt to bring it up. Like, your first thought in that instance probably wouldn't be, oh, Guinan's never met me because the Federation never existed. And also, again, Star Trek has an incredibly simplistic and sometimes frustrating rule that on-screen equals canon, period. And so that explanation is a non-canon explanation, is it was never on screen. Don't get mad at me. I don't write the rules. Like, I get angry when those biographies from Inner Mirror Darkly are non-canon, even though they were written on the sets in present during film day. Because the camera never pointed at them, they're not canon. I don't make the rules, I just know them. Next up, Alton Soong. Interesting. You know, I like that they kept the geneticist angle from, of course, the Soong family line. Further giving credence to the theory that the Soongs are some genetically engineered to look like Brent Spiner. It's an interesting one, that conference at the beginning, because like I'm not really sure who to root for, because it's very clear Alton's doing some unethical stuff to get to the ends of his genetic engineering, which is a good goal. Star Trek that's like probably the one, I won't say the one like definitively, but that's probably the biggest place Star Trek's ethics have been wrong from the beginning, is with genetic engineering. One of my college papers was about how Star Trek is wrong with genetic engineering. But like, you know, all that unethical stuff, like that unethical research stuff, yeah, he shouldn't be doing that. But it was also kind of weird that, because the board, one of the biggest complaints is that he's doing unsanctioned illegal research. I'm like, who are you though? Because like, he seems to be coming to you to do legal research, unless you're like, I don't know, the board of international unethical researchers or something. But anyway, solid motive. It makes sense. I imagine the disease as we saw it isn't real. I've heard of some vaguely similar stuff, but good enough, you know, for fiction. Yeah, she dies if she goes in the sun or outdoors, like dust particles. Good. Oh, a bit from the intro. A manned, or rather crewed mission to Europa. Yeah, I'll give it that, and they've given reason why it's a big deal. I'm forgetting that the Star Trek timeline is further ahead than we are, which I don't think space-wise is something we actually knew. Like, we cannot do a manned mission to Europa in any way. There is no way we could do that in 2 years. But yeah, in Star Trek they apparently can. One person as well. It is kind of weird, the mission to Europa. Because like, it's one person, it really doesn't feel like a well-designed mission. Because you'd go insane. And Rene, I'm not entirely sure how she got into the astronaut corps. I don't know ESA's standards. I'd expect they're not too dissimilar from NASA's with the psychological evaluations. Because someone like that, depression, anxiety, you wouldn't go to space. You just wouldn't. For, I mean, the obvious reasons. It's why they have the psychic evaluations. You have to be the model of physical and mental health to go to space. And the woman we see in this training thing is not prepared to do a mission of this grandeur, any mission, in 3 days. She is not. She wouldn't fly. And they have a backup crew. Like, unless maybe they're also a mess, you always have the backup crew. But I suppose the counter is, if Q's been sort of her evaluator for some time, he could be telling Issa, rather, oh yeah, she's great, she's good to fly, well, simultaneously messing her up without the higher-ups' knowledge. Like, I could see that. Doesn't quite explain her behavior in the simulator. Like, that's not how astronauts behave. What's the masterclass ad they used to run with Chris Hadfield? No astronaut flies to space on the seat of their pants. Like, you just don't. You would not be allowed in a capsule. You know everything. You know what you're doing. I suppose, again, you could argue the different times the society's about to collapse. Like, maybe they're less strict. But who knows? It was also weird. I thought I was going to get into the positives. It's also weird that, like, she found a microorganism on Europa that she thought was sentient. Bit weird, but alright. I mean, we've seen this before in Star Trek, sentient microorganisms. And then she convinced Issa to let her bring it back. Good lord, that's one hell of a public speaker. You wouldn't do that. In Apollo, even when we were pretty gosh darn sure that there was no life on the moon, we still quarantined the astronauts until we were absolutely goddamn sure there was no life on the moon. And Europa is, like, other than Earth, of course, probably the place we would find life. It also sort of breaks canon, is it means first contact was not made with the Vulcans. It was made with some microorganism from Europa. And also, that just seems incredibly unethical. Like, all right, imagine it this way. You're part of Columbus's crew, Christopher Columbus's crew. You arrive in America, and you're like, well, I guess you'd think you were in India. You arrive in America, and you know it's America, right? You know it's a different place. You're like, my God, there are people here. This is a different culture. Let's bring one home with us. That's... Maybe they asked, but like if the microorganism could ask, hey, can I come home with Earth to Earth with you? Well, then you could prove its first contact without bringing it home from Earth because it asked you. That feels really messed up. Not necessarily something that a society that's about to collapse wouldn't do, but like that's not the hero of the story. Q subverting history like this, actively going against it, still feels weird. Like, we don't know what's wrong with him. I would not be surprised if that's season 3, because we know John Delancey's doing season 3. They were filming them back to back. He'd need a pretty good explanation, I feel. It's kind of, he's not really subverting history. This is almost the prequel. Oh, timey-wimey. It is the prequel to, like, for John Delancey, this happened before we see him in The Stargazer. Because he had to change history, then go do that. So if Q meets Picard, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, and with Q, do you know how many times in this episode I went, that's not how that works? Q magic. Like the 3D printer and stuff is the example that comes to head. There were so many times I'm like, that's not actually how that works. Q magic. Which is a cheap way out, but not necessarily a wrong one. Generally, though, where this was an episode that was pretty enjoyable, it's still... didn't feel like an expertly written one. Emphasis on expert. I'd be curious to see how experienced these producers are at doing what they do. The best example that comes to mind is when we first see Alton meeting Not Soji. He goes in, and so Not Soji, I'm gonna call her Soji because I don't remember her name. Soji's like, Dad, how did it go? Or something, which is like, great. You know, you've established that this is Alton's daughter. It's natural, you know, she calls him dad a lot. I know people who do that even at that age, even mommy, daddy, stuff like that. Like, yeah, it was a natural conversation. It established the relations. We know everything we have. And then not 2 lines later, you have like, Soji, my child. It's like, okay, thanks, in case you missed it the first time. You had, when Picard was like, Laris? You're Laris? And then he's like, no, you're not. And it flashed back to scenes of Laris, in case you forgot who Laris was from episode 1. And then there's, of course, the stuff I've mentioned before. Why is the Borg Queen still active? Why is Jurati so close to the Borg Queen? Why would you use a shotgun from that distance to rescue a hostage? I feel like the blast radius of the shotgun, its whole thing is spread. It would probably hit the French guy, who's, by the way, now missing a spleen and, like, missing his memory of an instant report. That guy's life is over. Like, could you imagine if you went to respond to some crime? No, could you imagine if you woke up one morning and the police department was asking you how that Picard mansion incident went, and you have no memory of a Picard mansion incident? They have the records, they have the calls you made in, and also one day you discover you're missing your spleen? Like, good lord, that would end your life. It really does feel rough around the edges in a lot of that sense. And there's a lot of the scenes where I was watching, I was like, why? That doesn't make sense. It's in a lot of stuff with the time travel ethics. You know, they can't beam Rios out because they would destroy the timeline. So instead, they're going to free the bus of ice prisoners, you'd call it, ice prisoners. Yeah, they're almost certainly innocent. Almost, though. I don't know how many people who get deported are actual criminals other than illegal immigration itself. But, like, you're thinking a bus full, maybe one of them would be, and that's a problem. But even if they're not criminals, like, there's a good dozen people whose lives have just been completely changed. Some Mexican children who aren't going to be born, some American children who might be born, which will then trickle down, you know, that'll change marriages on both sides. It's a it's a big hassle. Like, yeah, you've almost, actually, I'd say this is more damaging. If you just beamed Rios out, people would have been, let's never talk about this again. You know, this way you've ruined history again, which is a standard for Star Trek. But that one bothered me as well. Rafi. I'm pivoting a lot now into time travel talk. Rafi, when Seven was like, you can't beam him out, the time travel. Rafi's like, time travel ethics? I'm like, yeah, you first officer to Admiral Picard. You are a Federation first officer. Did you remember that? Rios, I wrote a note down because it caught me off guard so much. Rios pointed to Rafi and referred to her as an ex-spy. I'm sorry, when was that? When was Rafi a spy? When has the Federation had spies? Other than Section 31, which we wouldn't know about. And sure as hell would not work with Picard. Like, Rafi is a former Federation first officer. In fact, she's a first officer again, or she's even a captain at the start of this episode. Like, what the hell do you mean? Time travel ethics? Like, what? They could probably detect him some other way. Just like he's the only one on the planet that's got like a chip, medical chip stuff they mentioned. Yeah. It's missing that shine, almost, of a writer who knows what they're doing. It's exposition somewhat clunky often, or it doesn't really make sense, and it's upsetting, but it's at least you can get these enjoyable episodes, if, you know, flawed in places, but you're never going to get a great episode with writers like that. One last thing I want to address before the scene by scene. The sheer quantity of the same actor playing entirely separate characters is incredibly off-putting. Brent Spiner is fine. There's precedent for that Soong family line. He is a Soong. There's family, you know, in television, when someone plays like their ancestor or descendant in these time travel stories, you can go like, yeah, all right. You know, it's good enough, especially for a Soong at this point. But like, why does Soji look like Alton's daughter? Alton's daughter being probably some genetic experiment because she doesn't have a mother, and Brent Spiner is incredibly uncomfortable with that. It's clearly a lie. It'll come up at some point. You don't actually have a mother. You were grown in a test tube. But, again, clunky writing. Again, oh yeah, why does she look like Soji and Daj, who were artistically designed by Bruce Maddox, who has no relation to the Soongs? I mean, I guess he had a Soong partner, but why do they look exactly the same? And again, especially with Lars, like, why? Right now, this is just some person, maybe human, Gary Seven was human, who happens to look like our Romulan from the future, except, of course, for the ears. It's just off-putting, and even if there's an explanation, when I get it in a month, it's going to have been off-putting for a month, and just really takes me out of the action. Like, I guess you had these people signed contracts for so many seasons, so you gotta put them in somehow. The solution there is to just pay them off, or, because I get budgets are a thing, don't write a story that doesn't include them for an entire season. Have Soji be in the story, but as Q magic. I really don't understand the decision, other than as some sort of contract thing. I'd be surprised if Laris had something in her contract, because she was a pretty minor character. But even if she did, I really don't understand. Like, even if that's the reason, again, the solution is to, well, rewrite a story with what you actually have. I'd like to highlight as well, this is kind of different than people like Jeffrey Combs or Vance Armstrong who play loads of people, because often they're distributed across series. It still is kind of weird. Like, it's fun seeing Odo in Enterprise, but it's also just Odo. It definitely takes you out of it a bit. The reason that's different is because usually these people will be under heavy makeup of different aliens, and so they'll actually look quite different and distinct. This is a human, or one of the essentially human aliens, you know, where it's just the ears or the nose that's different, playing someone who looks exactly like their other character, other than, again, the ears with Laris. Nothing else. Same voice, same everything. It's just, why? It doesn't make sense. It just takes you out of it. And it takes you out of it far more than Jeffrey Combs or Vance Armstrong will take you out of it. Like, Tim Russ was in a Star Trek a lot before Tuvok, and then I'm pretty sure he's not in Star Trek at all after Tuvok, because now he's Tuvok. You can't have Tim Russ without it being kind of odd. Like, oh, that's Tuvok. I'm totally out of the action now. And I think it's that time again, to get into the scene by scene. I know there's loads of scenes I want to talk about, but it's good to see a decent episode. And not a good episode. It was a good episode. Definitely nothing to write home about, but I enjoyed watching it, which was far more than I've gotten from most of this season. But it means, of course, since we've had the positive, our counters reset. We won't do the live stream next week. We'll keep doing reviews for at least 3 more weeks. And I think that takes us pretty far. Yeah, episode 8, I might just finish it off at that point. We'll see how things go. This was another odd one. Again, with kind of the writing quality, probably like about halfway through the scene, I realized, oh, this is a simulation. Because I don't know, it just kind of obviously was. For one, just it'd be weird to kill off this character randomly we don't know like this. And also all the setup of how it's the Europa mission. Well, if it fails now, then the season's over. They failed. Done. Star Trek's the Confederation now. But also, it was really weird as someone who knows about space, like, that this Russian satellite collision would threaten to end this mission. Epistemically possible, but we do track these things, and when you do a launch like this, you clear all the airspace, of course, but you definitely check the orbits, the paths you're going to go through for like just a few minutes. It's gotta be. I suppose it depends how they're doing the burns. It's a bit I won't get into it here, but like you definitely check your orbital path and make sure nothing's gonna hit it. And it's weird to think that we wouldn't like be aware of this. And even if there was some sort of Russian satellite collision, that like it'd be close enough to your launch window, this Russian satellite, that would threaten to deorbit you or like collide with you. Again, different future where people still have Teslas, but you know, we can do manned missions to Europa. So it's also just kind of a weird test to run, but you also prepare for like literally everything. So yeah, I don't know how she was supposed to get out of this though. You can't exactly abort a mission in a state like this when your maneuvering thrusters are done. Did anyone else find it weird when the Borg Queen was like, computer, patch me into the like telecommunication signals, and then the response is 911, what's your emergency? Or rather 999, 112, whatever. I thought she was just gonna listen in, but I guess she got 911. Also, if you're the French police, right, you send a guy out to investigate some screaming woman disturbance, whatever, in an abandoned mansion. You send your officer, who reports he's going to check the place out, kind of mumbled, communications are down. You don't hear anything from him for a few hours. At what point do you send more officers, maybe? Well, then again, I guess there are those Neo-Trotsky riots to be dealing with right now. And you thought our world was bad. But hey, at least this world doesn't have COVID. You can tell because just 3 days before a space mission, where everyone's going to have to go in quarantine, so it's so you don't get sick, basically, before your mission, they're having a massive social get-together with loads of press that's mandatory as well. Like, no. That's not going to happen in our 2024. I was almost really angry that Picard didn't recognize what was obviously the iconic voice of Q. He did ask for visual confirmation, I suppose. I mean, in a world where like he's just met someone who looks and sounds exactly like his friend Laris, I suppose it's a good check to make. Well done. But the point is, I like that there was acknowledgement that, like, I'm sorry, you're monitoring these private therapy conversations and like presumably monitoring this woman's life 24/7. Like, God, the things that deal with the kind of ramifications of time travel being invented and being a historical figure are nightmarish. But then the fact that it was kind of resolved, it's like these are private. Like, he's outraged, of course, and not Laris is like, are they? And Picard's like, oh, well, good enough for me. Like, I get that this is kind of super important. It's similar to in Starfleet, where a person's medical privacy will extend as far as the safety of the ship. In Star Trek, has never been great with medical ethics, but there are the situations where the person's individual medical privacy is less important than something else. And then later they show it to everyone, like the actual therapy session, which is probably got to be the most intimate and private thing in this woman's life. The ethical thing to probably do in this situation, because this is information that needs to be said. There's what does the law call it? Clear and present. That's the word. Clear and present danger would be not to show the tapes, but explain what was happening. Explain that therapy's going well. Not going well. I guess you need Picard to recognize Q. I was going to say you could just have us as the audience see the therapy session as she's describing it. But again, you're throwing out ethics, incredibly important ethics, for the sake of your plot. And when Jean-Luc Picard is in this scene, that's a big no-no. The clever way around it, here you go, is do exactly what I just... not exactly what I said, sorry. You could still have us flash the audience, see exactly this, is Alleles is explaining it. But you could have her try and show it to Picard and have him be outraged, like, shut that down. But he heard a bit of the conversation. At the start, he realizes, because John Delancey has an iconic voice, and therefore so does Q, like, instantly recognizable, where he goes, hang on, like, not without the voices, like, show me the doctor. And then he recognizes Q, because there's the clear and present danger. That's the way you ethically do that scene. And then you don't show it to the crowd of people just watching this therapy session of this poor woman. That's the way you do this scene correctly. Because I think they clearly want to acknowledge that this is wrong, looking in on this woman's therapy session. But they failed to do that because their resolution was, is it private? Oh no, I guess not. Carry on then. Like, even if they tried a worse, like, the timeline is about to be plunged into some horrific dystopia, are you really concerned about medical ethics? Like, that is wrong. But it's better than what they did of, no, actually, it's not private. And did you notice, by the way, Laris was using what really looked like a Romulan tablet. Romulan interfaces, Romulan characters. I'm not an expert, like, on all that typography and stuff, but it really, really said Romulan to me. People who have monitors like this are insane. Yes, I have just as much monitor space, but because I have 3 monitors, because I'm a sensible human being. I loved this scene where Brent Spiner's like, Q? Because I would have praised this episode so damn hard if he had gone, a magnifying glass. Because is Q really what, like, you'd notice from this? Like, sure, it's the thing from the title sequence, which is a Q, but, like, it's also not really a Q here. You don't have that defined border. What the highlight is the magnifying glass. Like, actually, that looks nothing like a Q. That's a magnifying glass in a circle. You know, Jurati got a shotgun from the Picard Manor, which isn't the most unreasonable thing. You know, going to fight the Borg Queen. I can understand it. I'm not too happy. I'm never like when Star Trek is I've got to grab my gun. I had the same problem with Ruth, actually, in Doctor Who. The very first thing Ruth's doctor did when she learned she was the doctor was go and get a gun. God, that put me off her so hard. But anyway, they have phasers, right? Like, there are phasers on the ship. I find it kind of weird that Jurati didn't actually go for the, you know, much more ethical weapon with a stun. Also, yes, television medical procedures, where you just inject the thing and your test is to just fully expose yourself to sunlight in the middle of nowhere, like, instantly after the injection. We've all had 3 injections recently, and if you haven't, okay, no, there are some people watching this who might have some medical condition. Everyone who has had 3 medical jabs recently, and we all know that it's gonna take about 2 weeks to work. Oh, sure, Alton analyzed it, and, like, you know, he understands it really well, but there's a limit to how fast things can travel through your body. Like a physical limit that has to do with your heart rate and stuff. Is that really gonna be your test? You wouldn't be like, okay, honey, put your like hand out the window or something. Let's see what happens. Also, she was an outstanding swimmer for someone who's never swam before. She's also a horrible swimmer for someone who's been practicing in that pool I'm pretty sure I saw inside their house. There's no middle ground with our clone-grown lady person. I don't know. What would you call that? There's nothing wrong with being grown in a vat. It's just, I'm gonna laugh at how obvious I feel the twist is. And like I can see it where like, I'm loyal to my father. It's like, has your father been truthful to you? Yes, he loves me. He's like, but did you know you don't have a mother? You were grown in a vat. Oh no, I'm gonna recognize my father as an immoral human being and side with the good guys. That's what I see. Yeah, I remember when I used Scooby-Doo to predict Discovery Season 4. What's your point? Oh, and also, this is a person who the government knows commits illegal and unethical experiments, genetic experiments, and for some reason hasn't done anything about it. His solution, after being told your license being revoked, you can never perform genetic experiments again, is to have her daughter, who's never gone outside and people know about her, like she can't be outside, inject herself with something in public in broad daylight in an era where we have satellite surveillance systems. I would have liked more explanation on my technology can only get one of us through the system. Why? If you have the power to put one person in the system, give them an entire life's history, a fake passport, a fake driver's license, and scramble the facial recognition system, why can't you do that for an unlimited number of people? I don't really see a reason. And if it's because you only have maybe like one device to scramble things, why can't you just make more of that device using the 25th century starship parked out on the lawn? I'm not saying there can't be a reason. Like even if it was just one I can do, but more than one they'd notice. Fair enough, especially if it goes a bit like wibbly on the screen. I also find it weird that like, are they supposed to cure this woman of her anxiety and depression in a night after like some incredibly competent therapist, which I'm gonna assume the omnipotent Q is, has been actively sabotaging her for God knows how long? Like clearly not, because there are still 5 episodes left of the series, but it's weird. I think I've discovered a meme template, another one. But anyway, yeah, the twist that everyone saw coming. Hang on, she did use nanoprobes. Someone was telling me, they said that in like episode 2, they removed the Borg's nanoprobes when she got captured. But she assimilated using the nanoprobe tubes. Why did they plug Girardi in the last episode? Anyway, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed this episode. It's not horrible writing. It's not like Chris Chibnall or anything. It's just, I think it's unrefined, a lot of this writing, which is why a lot of the filler episodes are kind of nothing and just bad. I think it's why episode 1 was very clunky when they were just trying to establish everything, and why there's so many bits that just kind of feel clunky or like you're early in your career as a writer. And I think the main proof I have of that is I largely enjoyed this episode. The Borg Queen thing is, basically season ruining. It makes no sense. But even if you just kind of follow that plot and be like, okay, they left her on, whatever. Well, I'm enjoying it. There are problems, but I'm enjoying it. Yet when I get to this review, I have very little positive things to say because there are so many nitpicks and a lot of things about how the plots kind of don't really work that it's the phrase I don't like a lot of shut your brain off entertainment, which I've never really understood when you start bringing up like plot problems and how things don't logically make any sense or there's no connective canon and people say, oh, just shut your brain off, enjoy it. I don't understand how you could want to be told a narrative that has no narrative and that there's no consistency. That like it's not a problem specifically with Picard, but a plot that doesn't make sense because characters are doing things that make no logical sense, ignoring completely obvious solutions like turning off the Borg Queen, then it's not a plot you can believe in. It's not a plot that, it's hard to explain, it just doesn't work. It's as simple as that. Like, I don't understand how you can enjoy a story that doesn't work. And in terms of canon, if you remove canon literally entirely, there's no connective tissue between any episodes of a show whatsoever. I think it'd be hard to argue that that's a good show. Variety shows, I suppose, are kind of like that. Or Sunday Night Live, that's the one. Something like that, I guess, is a show with no canon, probably. But like, if you can remove the history, if you can just rewrite, like for Star Trek, alien races or all this history, then what that means for your story is that the events of a story have no consequence. Because in the next installment of the story, they could have just not happened or happened differently or be nothing. What no canon means is no consequence. And I don't understand how you can enjoy a story without either, first, that doesn't work, and where there are no consequences. And I can't remember what my original point was, but yeah, it feels like a lot of writers, which again might be a problem. Often when you get so many showrunners, writers, and people, the end product does tend to suffer, too many cooks sort of thing. I'm not sure exactly the reason, but it really, the heights of Picard, when they're not filling it, I think Picard's main problem is this doesn't have to be 10 episodes. Like, it's a solid 5 episodes, probably a solid 5-6 episodes. But if you just did, heck, do that. Give us a 5-episode season, or give us 2 plots over a season. I think a lot of people enjoy that better. Discovery largely fixed the problem in that it did have a lot of episodic style filler episodes. The main plot probably did drag on an episode or 2 longer than it should have. I'll give it that. But it feels like they're being serialized for the sake of that's what modern shows are, not because it's what their show needs. And if they just did the first half of season 1, heck, you could even split it, like a lot of seasons are. You could even say the first half of season 1 is this time travel stuff, fine. The second half of season 2 is maybe dealing with Q, like what was up with Q, or some adventure in the 24th century. I think this would be a lot better, because episode 1 setup was meh. You know, it was alright in that second half after they did their setup. Episode 2, really good. They're actually moving their plot forward, they're telling their story, it's great. Episodes 3 and 4, nothing happened. You can cut them entirely. There was a Spanish doctor in this season. I've completely forgotten about her. She's disappeared. 3 and 4, if you get rid of them, the story does not change at all, with the exception of Picard finding the Watcher. You could have that be half an episode. Like, all the Rios bits, it's filler. Added nothing to the story, nothing happened, and wasn't even really a commentary on modern-day immigration policy. Episode 5, again, they're doing stuff. They're telling their story, and it's really good. So just cut out the filler and write the 2 smaller stories. And yeah, as we're approaching the hour mark, I'm thinking I'm going to call it there. We are going to return for another review next week, where hopefully it should be good. It looks like they're actually going to tell their story again, because they've got to do stuff with Rene. They can't really do a filler. It's probably going to be like is it Bada Bing Bada Bang? Is that the episode? The Deep Space Nine one with Vic Fontaine where they do that heist. It's very much, they want to do some sort of heist spy espionage episode. I mean, I loved Bada Bing Bada Bang. You know, it can be fun to change your genre up a little bit. I mean, again, I'm going to compare it to Bada Bing Bada Bang, which is a great episode, assuming that's what it's called. I'm going to double check that. And you could have that problem of before where, well, I'm only going to compare it to this. And if it's not as good, well, then I'm just going to want to watch that. And if it's better, you've kind of ruined Bada Bing Bada Bang. It is. Bada Bing Bada Bang is a very late Deep Space Nine episode. Incredibly late. It was supposed to be just before the 10-part finale. It wasn't. It got swapped around with this Section 31 episode because the producers liked it better. but the true order, it's just before the final 10-part arc, because he sings the best is yet to come at the end. Anyway, this isn't a Deep Space Nine review. Thanks for watching, and surprisingly, I'll see you next time.